Hey guys, today I want to talk about 1000 Voices after the latest patch Bungie just released. For those who didn't know, Bungie just put out a little mini update that made it so that swords have regenerative ammo temporarily. This is only in effect in certain activities, pretty much anything outside of Real Crucible and raids and dungeons this is able to be done in, so Grandmasters are probably the most notable part about that. But what's really interesting is that for whatever reason, Bungie made it so that 1000 Voices also has this regenerative ammo, and it is actually a decent weapon when it has infinite ammo, at least when it comes to roam content. So we put together a little bit of a build for it, and we're going to be showing that off, as well as just showing off how good the weapon is. So first thing about the build is you'll notice that this is a little bit of a hybrid build. Pretty much I'm running the heal spam setup on Warlock. I actually covered this at the start of Final Shape if you're interested in seeing that. It's basically half of a build and you can kind of do whatever you want with the other half of the build. So I thought it was a great fit for this because we're pretty much just making a mini Scorch build with the other half of the build. But first of all, let's just look at 1K itself. And first of all, let me just explain this little graphic I've made. Basically, you can see right away what I've shown that it's good for, and then the blue bars indicate what the difference is with the infinite ammo right now. So you can see pretty much it just makes the ammo infinite. Normally it's not that good, and it's also going to add a little bit to its long DPS and its ag clear just because you normally wouldn't use it for ag clear otherwise. So the strengths that 1K have when it comes to a Grandmaster strike at least is a couple of things. The first one is that it applies Scorch on each tick of the laser. This means that with Ember of Ashes on a solar subclass, one full shot equals one ignition, so it is able to stun unstops on its own. And especially now since you have infinite ammo, it really doesn't hurt to just waste the time of just spamming it at everything, so yeah, just do unstops with it. And the beautiful thing also is that when it's radiant, it is a very viable barrier weapon as well. It's definitely not the best barrier weapon in the game, however, because of its abysmal handling, I would just get radiant and pop shields with it still. I think it's still the faster way to doing it than switching to a sniper. So right away, it's able to handle the two champ types that we have going on currently, and if we are doing another Overload GM in the future, or maybe you're doing Lost Sectors or something with this setup, I would suggest just having an ability that does Overload, maybe Stasis Turrets on Warlock. You could switch over to Prismatic instead of Solar, or you could just use an Overload weapon and just put up with the swap speed. Now the other great thing about 1K is that while it's charging and shooting, you can wave it around, and this basically lets it have some pretty good ag clear. You could just find a crowd and just kind of wave around your wand looking at them and they'll all just go away. And finally, it's even a decent weapon for unorganized DPS. And when I say unorganized, I basically just mean not a raid DPS weapon. If we look at the damage sheet, it gets 180k DPS, which is very respectable. Again, it's definitely not a raid DPS weapon where you typically want over 200k, but it's still very high for just a regular weapon to be using and having 100% uptype on, which is made possible by the infinite ammo that we currently have with this regenerative ammo. Also, some important stuff to note about the weapon is that you can absolutely kill yourself, and you probably will. Every single one of the little explosions that it makes off of the laser you shoot will instantly kill you if you're right next to it, so just keep that in mind when you're up close, and try not to curse at your teammates when they jump in front of you. So now let's go ahead and get into the actual build that we have going on Warlock here. But really quickly before we do, I gotta take a moment and ask you guys, if you're enjoying the video and you like my content, or you've been watching my videos for a while but haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it if you did. I'm trying to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And also leave a comment. I read every single one of my comments and I love to get to read them. I actually get a notification on my phone every time somebody sends one in, and I harder respond to all of them unless I think you're being mean. But that's enough e-begging for me, let's get back to the video. So you'll see first things first, we're using the Song of Flame super. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first one is just the survivability. Anytime you're in a tricky situation or you know you're about to go run into the thick of it, you just pop your super and you become effectively invincible. And the other part of this is it adds extra Scorch to your shots, so you get even more consistent ignitions using it. If you hit every single tick on one single enemy without any extra effects, as long as you have Ember of Ashes, you will be able to get an ignition off. But if you miss even one tick, you won't get that, and Song of Flame fixes that and makes it easier, or even makes it possible to ignite multiple enemies at once. As for the aspects, I went with Icarus Dash and Hellion. Icarus Dash is just because I wanted to go fast. If you really wanted to be optimal, you would probably use Heat Rises so that you could pop your Heat Rises grenade to make healing turrets while you're in your super. But I didn't really find myself needing that, and if I really wanted to do that, I was able to just think with my brain ahead of time a little bit and just throw a healing turret before I went into super. But if you're somebody who doesn't care about your movement, then yeah, just run Heat Rises and use it so that you can pop a bunch of healing turrets while you are in Super. As for the melee and grenade, obviously we're going to be using the healing grenade since we'll have on the Speaker's Mask. And I decided to go with Celestial Fire for this one. However, you could definitely run Snap as well. Basically, the difference is Celestial Fire has a lot more range and it lets you proc Radiant more consistently from far away. However, the Snap does quite a bit more Scorch and a lot more damage. But it does have a shorter range. So pretty much you could just pick the one that you think is more valuable to yourself. Then finally for the fragments, this is where the interesting part comes in. First things first, we're going to have Ember of Ashes. We already talked about this a little bit. Basically, more Scorch stacks. It's very good for this build because we have Scorch coming in from all over the place between 1k Voices, our melee, Hellion, or our super. This just adds to the ignitions, which makes the build even more damaging. Next up, we're going to be using Ember of Torches. This is so that we can consistently get Radiant. Since we're going to have constant uptime on our abilities thanks to another fragment, this is going to be super helpful for being able to take on barriers with 1k and also just increasing your damage output as well. And now for that big important one, it is going to be Ember of Benevolence. Benevolence is awesome because it gives you a ridiculous amount of ability regen for something that you're just constantly doing all the time on this build, and that is healing or empowering your teammates. If you give them either Cure, Restoration, Radiant, even your Empowering Rift or your Healing Rift, all those effects will give you a buff, Ember of Benevolence, and that gives you a 400% ability regen multiplier, which basically means you get back all your abilities in 6 seconds. This is what really ties the build together and just makes it as powerful as it is, and is what makes Speaker's Masks just so ridiculous in Grandmasters right now. And for the last one, this is going to be the flexible slot. I'm going with Ember of Eruption just to make the ignitions even bigger and more damaging. But this is one that you could swap out for something else if you wanted to have it instead. Maybe Solace so that you have more uptime on your own buffs like Radiant and all that. Or if you wanted to do something else, maybe Ember of Singeing so that you can get your class ability quicker if you're running out of that a lot. Basically, this is just the extra help slot that you could switch out for whatever you want. And lastly, going over armor mods, I actually recommend running Dexterity and Reload mods on this thing just because it's so slow at handling and reloading. And with the Ember of Benevolence setup that we have, we don't really need the extra ability regen that you normally use your Gauntlet mods for. As for the helmet, just run a bunch of Solar Siphons, maybe a super gen perk if you want to, but realistically, all of your damage and everything you're doing is with the weapon, so yeah, Solar Siphons, at least 2 of them. On the chest, obviously, you just want to run 3 resistance mods of whatever the activity is. Clearly, you don't need reserves if you already have infinitely regenerating ammo. For this week's strike, it's going to be Solar and possibly Arc as the secondary, but mainly Solar, and I always recommend a concussive because basically every threatening damage type in the game is concussive. Then for the boots, you might want to run a scavenger for your kinetic weapon if you want to, but you definitely don't need one for your heavy weapon. And other than that, just run a bunch of perks that give you benefits for your orbs. And this is actually one of few builds for GMs that I would suggest even using surge mods for. For most normal builds, I recommend not running surges so that you can do stuff like Special Finisher and spend those mod slots on like survivability and scavenger mods. But in this case, it really doesn't matter because you don't have any ammo problems with only using your heavy and having infinite ammo. And you also don't really have any survivability issues since you're on a healing spam build and you're just constantly getting restoration anyway. But ultimately, you can make it however you want to, and these are just kind of the guidelines. The mods are probably the least important part of the build, but I thought I'd just go over them because in previous build videos, I've kind of ignored them and people have asked me to talk about them before. Anyway, I'll have all that in the build link in the description if you don't feel like setting that up yourself, although I do still like to explain some of the variances that you can make and why I chose what I did choose to put into the build link. Anyway, that's going to do it for the video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.